습니다. 주차권은 저 등록 데스크에서 받으시면 되고요. 그 다음에 점심 식사 직전에는 연자분들과 교실 내 교수님들과 연단해서 사진 촬영이 있겠습니다. 그리고 끝나고 만찬에 초청 받으신 분들은 끝나고 바로 위층에서 하얏트로 가는 버스가 대기할 예정입니다. 그 버스를 이용해 주시면 고맙겠습니다. 그러면 시간이 좀 많이 지체된 관계로 두 번째 세션 Perspectives of Neurosurgery를 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 좌장은 김국기 교수님과 김수환 교수님께서 맡아주시겠습니다.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor for us to have a chair this international symposium for commemoration of 50th anniversary of establishment of the Department of Seoul National University Hospital. I am Kukki Kim, Gyeonggi University Hospital, and I was trained here and moved to Gyeonggi University in 1976. And co-chair Professor Suhan Kim from Jeonnam University. First two topics will be provided by me, and the second by Professor Kim. When I had a training here in this department, only three professors we have. Professor Bosong Shim, unfortunately he passed several years ago, and Professor Ju Jong-ha and Professor Gil-Soo Choi. I recognized in this morning there has been a lot of progress and development in this department for last 30 years. As a former alumni professor, president, I would expect I would be appreciative to all these members and staff for their effort and enthusiasms. Now I introduce Professor Apuzzo, as everyone know him. He was graduate at Yale College and entered Boston University School of Medicine and graduated 1965. And he had an internship in McGill University 1 year, and then returned home, Yale University, and served as a neurosurgery program. He had a fellowship neurophysiology and neuropathology and diving and nuclear medicine in submarine. So he had a basic form field at the time. He worked as an instructor 1 year in Yale University, and he moved the place, Los Angeles, and he became an assistant professor in 1973 in University of Southern California. So he worked there about 34 years. So he became a professor in 1980, and now he's a professor and director of gamma knife and cyber knife and stereotactic neurosurgery and epilepsy surgery and basic research in cancer hospitals. As you know, he wrote a famous book, The Third Ventricle Tumors, and he served as editor of neurosurgery. So now I'll introduce, and would you please to speak? The topic of today is capturing of stardust.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure for me to be here, and a revelation as well. I've been aware for many years of the energy and the growth of neurosurgery here over the course of the past 50 years, but I had no idea of the quality, substance, and the elements of excellence that there was here till the past couple of days. So thank you, Don Kim, for having me, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Yesterday at the hospital, I gave a sort of brief lecture that was a practical lecture related to history. And history, I think, is important for all of us, but this lecture will have very little practicality associated with it. It's a lecture of ideas. It's a lecture of a sort of intellectual sort of futurism. And to begin this, I'd like to show this image. This image is a mural by Diego Rivera, the esteemed muralist from Mexico. And as you recall, he was actually called upon by the Rockefeller family to do a extensive mural in Rockefeller Center, which, as you know, is the one of the great capitalistic, if you would, centers or monuments for the world, or certainly it was in the 30s when it was being built. And as Rivera was working on this monument, or to what was supposed to be to capitalism, it became apparent to the Rockefeller family that yes, this artist was very much bent to the left, and they went into the Rockefeller Center and actually dismantled this monument. But Diego went back to Mexico City, and in the Palace of Fine Arts in Mexico City, you can go there today and see this magnificent mural that is called Man at a Crossroads. Now, as you can see, there is a element of conveying a sense of the times of 1934, and it related to communism and fascism and elements of man being overcome, if you would, not only by the forces, the socioeconomic forces that were present at that time, but also by the forces of nature that were there. Now, if you cone in, and now that big mural was entitled by Diego as Man at a Crossroads. However, I think there is a secondary story in this, and there is a secondary component of it which you see here, and that is fundamentally entitled by him Man as Controller of the Universe. And I think that what we're seeing as we go on in time is that we are taking more control of the universe as it exists, and this is what the substance of this lecture is going to be about. And it's going to be about what the spectrum, what the scope of modern science is about, and what capabilities that we have in the year 2007, and what capabilities we may have in the future, particularly as it pertains to us as neurosurgeons and us as doctors trying to face the elements of frustration in dealing with disorders of the central nervous system. So this, again, is entitled Stardust, Neurosurgery in the Realm of 10 to the -9th. So 10 to the -9th is the key number here. Let me begin by talking a little bit about astronomy and elements of astronomy. And since my arrival in Los Angeles, and probably prior to that, I've always been interested in astronomical issues of the universe, the galaxies, and so on. And most of us in neurosurgery have an element of dreamer in us, and certainly as you look up into the Milky Way, as you see here, and our galaxy, and consider the universe, there is a great deal that we don't know, but a great deal that we do know. And there was fundamentally a change that took place in what we know back in 1961, when at the Bell Laboratories in Murray Hill, New Jersey, radio astronomers at that time began to detect what was called a cosmic microscope background, or microscopic background, in which there was elements of a heat deposition that they could detect throughout the entire universe as they could see it. And because of that, in the 80s, a probe was sent a million miles from Earth to take this background of heat deposition and to try to measure it. And that probe actually gave what was a picture of the universe in its infancy. And it's very interesting because what took place during what was called the Big Bang deposited a lot of heat and gave actually a baby picture of what the universe was at that time. And that time fundamentally was 13.7 billion years ago. So this particular probe, this WMAP probe, went up and over the course of 1 year got fundamentally a fingerprint of heat patterns throughout the whole sky, and fundamentally gave this picture, this baby picture of the universe. And it is important because what it did was to begin to give us an idea of the time frames of what was taking place in terms of the evolution of stars, galaxies, and of course the element of our solar system as it evolved, and then various other elements of it. And of importance, as our solar system was formed about 4.6 billion years ago, one of the elements of detritus after the solar system was formed were the comets. And it's interesting when we begin to look at what the components of the universe is, the astronomers tell us that only 4% of the universe is composed of known matter. 23% of the universe is actually composed of unknown matter, of what is called dark matter, that is not understood by the astrophysicists or any people at this point in time. And the other about 70 or 73% is fundamentally a dark type of a force that is an anti-gravity that fundamentally holds the whole system in check. Now, the comets are important because as detritus after the formulation of what the planets are, they continue to circulate in the outer portion of our solar system by what's called the Kuiper belt. And the Kuiper belt is a deposition of ice and carbon and elements that are beyond the planet Neptune. And these comets will usually circulate in the outer reaches of the solar system, but occasionally they will come forward into the inner component of the solar system. And as they do, they begin to assume a given form. In the outer reaches of the solar system, being composed fundamentally of carbon and ice and some elements, they maintain their shape and form, and they are fundamentally a block of matter hurtling through space. As they begin to approach the sun, what takes place is they begin to melt, and whipped by the solar winds and by the heat change that actually takes place as they're approaching the sun, a tail begins to form. And you can see in this image of this comet, and what we think of comets, we think of the nucleus and we think of this tail. Well, the tail isn't always there. And the tail is important because what it is, it's elements of ice and carbon and various other other elements that are beginning to stream behind it, and then with the light and the solar wind, we begin to see it, and it's a great spectacle in our sky and for the astronomical people who were trying to watch it. Well, astronomers feel that the elements of these comets give us a lot of clues as to what the evolution of the solar system and planets fundamentally was. And so a fantastic project was created by the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which, as you know, is a branch of Caltech, which we have the pleasure of working with and that I've worked for. You heard I've been at USC for 34 years. Well, shortly after I got there, because of my involvement with nuclear subs and rocketry and so on that I was interested at that time, I went over to the JPL and became involved with them in a sense, and began to have the joy, pleasure, and the stimulation of working on various projects with them from the standpoint of the units that they were using in their rocketry and so on, because they wanted to justify what they were doing and look for applications in medicine that might be relevant. And actually, I had the pleasure of working on the Viking project, the first project that went and landed on the Martian surface. Well, I became aware of this project that was fundamentally created by JPL along with University of Washington and Lockheed Martin, and this project was launched from Cape Kennedy with this rocket in 1999, and the objective of this mission was to go billions of meters into space and recover elements of what the tail of the comet was. So there was a comet called Wilda II that was perturbed by its proximity to Jupiter into the inner portion of the solar system between Mars and Jupiter, and we had access to that. And because of that, what they did, they began to develop a scheme for which they could actually enter the tail of the comet with a space probe and recover some of the debris that was in the tail of the comet. Now, to do that, they created this substance called aerogel, and this aerogel is a whipped silicone, which is the lightest solid that is known to man, and it's very, very strong, and it's very porous, and you can see how it can support this brick. But at the same time, this was created to be put in this catchment grid that could be flown through the tail of the comet, and then we would pick up elements of what was in the comet tail. And here are the technicians at JPL working on it. Here it is now going to the space vehicle at the Cape Kennedy setting. And here's the space vehicle itself. This space vehicle is about 850 pounds. It's solar powered, and you can actually see the catchment grid as it is fundamentally in an erect point. Here's the comet. Here's the tail of the comet, and the encounter with the comet's tail was done at a speed of approximately 30,000 miles per hour, or 6 times the speed of a bullet. Here is actually some footage from the return. It required a 5-year journey to have the encounter with the comet Wilda II, and then a 2-year journey bringing the payload back. And here is the capsule coming back over the western desert. I won't give you the whole strip, but here it is on the desert in the west. Here it is at the Johnson Space Center. And here you can see the actual elements of the comet tail that were picked up. And here are fundamentally seeds from the history of the creation of the solar system, if you would. So they recovered fundamentally 1,000 of these elements of the tail of the comet and brought them back to the Johnson Space Lab, and they're being analyzed now from the standpoint of what they can tell us. And this is a fantastic journey where here's the picture actual nucleus of the comet that was taken during the journey, and this was a fantastic experiment that was undertaken during our times, and the actual transit was 500 times 10 to the 9th meters. So here is positive 500 times 10 to the 9th, so 10 to the 9th equals a billion. So again, something fantastic, and as we take control of our own universe, which is fundamentally medicine, we begin to think about neurosurgery. And what I'd like to do in the rest of the talk is to go to the other extreme. We're talking about, in plus terms, 10 to the 9th. And so what I'd like to do is begin to explore with you the issues of the possibility of going into the minus 9th, and to begin to talk about this issue of the progression of minimalism. All of us know that over the course of the past 30 years, there's been a progressive minimalism in neurosurgery. There's a minimalism in terms of what we can comprehend about the substrate that we're working with. There's a minimalism in terms of what we do in the surgical operating room. The surgical event, in terms of trying to push it into the future, is fundamentally an exercise in minimalism, and that we began with that with microsurgery, the issues of stereotaxy, elements of navigation now, endoscopy, radiosurgery, endovascular surgery, and the molecular adjuvants that we have. Well, molecular biology itself is, if you would, a molecular and cellular neurosurgery in which we try to comprehend and treat neurological disorders at the molecular level. And so the issue that became of interest to me personally is, as I followed science and had encounters either over lunch or at various times with colleagues at Caltech and at JPL, I began to think about, well, where are we going to go beyond the stage? Because now this is where we are, right? We're thinking at the molecular level in terms of what we can do ultimately to treat disorders. So let's talk about the future and the evolution of what minimalism will be in neurosurgery per se. Now, historians, as they look at the transformation in medicine, they see medicine being transformed from the 19th century into the 20th century and toward the 21st century, in that we will become molecular technologic with the potential for molecular structure being used to design microscopic units that will be able to affect health. So there will be, it's felt in the course of the next 100 years, a potential paradigm shift from medical science to medical engineering. Here are the grounds at Caltech, maybe hallowed grounds, but certainly I always feel a lot smarter just by going out there and just walking through these grounds. And it was interesting that Charles Liu talked about his appointment to Caltech and his lab work and our lab work that we're doing to Caltech at this time. But what he didn't say, that in the chemical engineering section there are 6 Nobel laureates. So it's really a very striking place, and it's a very striking place to be. So at Caltech, in 1959, this is Richard Feynman, and at an address to the American Physical Group at Caltech at Christmas time in 1959, he gave an after-dinner speech, and in that he talked about elements that he would like to describe a field in which little has been done, but in which an enormous amount can be done. It might tell us much of great interest about the strange phenomena that occur in complex situations. Furthermore, a point that is most important is that it would have an enormous number of technical applications. And what he talked about at that time was to think to the actual bottom of what matter was, and think in terms of the atom and manipulation at the atomic level to create either units or change in areas that we would like to have them happen, or to use thought of building from the bottom up to create changes in what our environment was. And so what he called this famous speech was, there was plenty of room at the bottom. And this was the beginning of nanotech. And certainly a lot has taken place since 1959. Now, from when we talk about nanotech, a nanometer is a billionth of a meter. And nanotechnology per se is the science for designing, fabricating, and applying nanosystems, and it's a synthesis of electrical engineering, biotech, chemistry, and physics. Molecular nanotech will be the three-dimensional positional control of atomic and molecular structure to create materials and devices with molecular precision. And nanobiotech will include investigations that consider biological events on the scale of individual molecules. Nanobiotech will assemble assay systems and create manipulations of the physical world at the nanometer and micrometer scale with the intent of detecting, separating, analyzing, manipulating, and characterizing cells or biological molecules of interest. And nanomedicine will involve designing, fabricating molecular devices and then employing them in our patients to establish and maintain health. And of great importance to try to get this concept, because this is the ultimate, that when we really approach mature nanomedicine, it will require the ability to build devices at anatomical precision, and the molecular nanotechnology and molecular manufacturing will be the key enabling technique for nanomedicine. Right now, we're in the stage of nanoscience, in which we're in the stage of trying to understand these manipulations at the atomic level, moving atoms, measuring atoms, and creating molecules at the very elemental level, and trying to understand what the phenomena are that occur at that level. And I'm going to go through some of these with you, but if we look through the highlights of nanotech from 1959 on, you will see that there are a lot of names there, and I'm not going to go through, I don't have time to go through each one of these, but there are a lot of Nobel laureates that are studying what's going on. And very, very important to comprehend that this is something that is real. There is what's been termed a nanotech gold rush going on, where virtually billions of dollars are being spent worldwide in thousands of labs to really investigate what's going on at the nano level, and how our comprehension of that can affect whether it's medicine or whether it's industry or whatever. Now, right now, there are a number of areas that can potentially influence us in neurosurgery where nanotech can play a role and is beginning to play a role, and they are computational science, imaging, molecular science, and biomedical engineering. From a standpoint of computational science, we've lived through, right now, the vacuum tube, of course, the transistor, and we're beginning to elude the capabilities of what the microchip is. The microchip exceptionally important to us. By Moore's law, there is a miniaturization ×4 every 3 years of what the microchip of what microchip science is, and with the minimalization of the microchip, we've seen that it's become more efficient, and it's more efficient in what the power use is. Ultraviolet radiation is currently employed in creating the microchip, but it has a limited resolution of 200 nanometers. Now, we need to apply nanoscale manufacturing methods for further miniaturization of these microchips, because as nanoscale is a approach, quantum mechanical effects begin to take place which hinder the optimum function of what those chips can do. And also, I think, as most of us recognize, there are fundamental limitations of what binary logic can do. So there are a couple of methodologies that I'll quickly go over that have been in evolution over the course of the past decade or two to try to get away from this idea that, yes, as we begin to even use nanomethods on microchips, that we're going to elude the capability of what this thinking can offer us in terms of computational force. The first of which is quantum computing in which methodologies are used to read and process information by analyzing really alterations in quantum mechanical phenomena at nanoscale. And the second is something that is very popular right now, and it's called molecular computation, in which the actual bottom line of the whole concept is that there will be integration of computers with living tissue in a synergistic fashion, creating hybrids that will really have the capability of making massively parallel processing possible. Now, when we talk about fabricating, creating things in the nanoscale, one of the methodologies is called bottom-up, in which we're beginning at the bottom and building things up. So taking atoms, using the atoms from the bottom, and then building things up. And one of the principles and one of the phenomena that take place that we'll illustrate in a short video in a second relates to the concept of self-assembly, in which if you put the right atoms together in a suitable climate, I think it's just a basic chemistry, that you will see that they will sort of set up in such a way that they can become useful to you. And here's a video that comes from Reed's lab at Yale.
Gold pads, each one smaller than a grain of dust.
Turn it up a little bit.
The molecules seek out the gold pads. They attach and stand upright like countless tiny individual wires. A layer of gold molecules is added on top to complete the circuit. Reed sends a current of electricity through. The device is in the on position. Another charge blocks the circuit, switching it off. This on-off sequence, corresponding to the ones and zeros at the heart of any computer calculation, has staggered the world of computer research.
Okay. Well, fundamentally, this is a methodology for improving what computational power is, and it's something that's really being explored through many labs at this time. Another area that's very important and where fantastic changes taking place is in the area of imaging. We know about our own medical imaging and using the microscope and the optical microscope and imaging in microscopy, but to manufacture, to manipulate, to diagnose and intervene at the nanoscale level will be predicated on imaging methodology that will allow us to see and to manipulate. Now, there are new techniques that allow nanoscale imaging and have the advantage of use with living tissue. In the past, tissue had to be fixed to really sort of appreciate what the organelle were and what the elements were as we began to approach nanoscale. But now we have what's called the scanning probe microscopy systems, of which there are a number of them. The most common one and the most usable one at this time is the so-called atomic force microscope, and it is an imaging technique that uses a probe placed extremely close to a sample to measure a local property such as height. And changes in the sample topography causes displacement of the probe, resulting in proportional changes in laser light refraction from the probe. The atomic force microscope can achieve vertical resolution of picometers and, as it says, as you see, a horizontal resolution of nanometers, and has the advantage of being used with living cells. And you can see here's in one of the labs at Caltech. This is an atomic force microscope, so it's certainly, even though it is imposing in terms of what it can do, physically it doesn't look like an imposing element. It doesn't take up a lot of space. But here are some of the images that you can get, and it's really very striking. So here is atomic force type of a microscope image showing a nickel oxide crystal. To your left and to the right, you see the oxygen atom in the center in B. Here is a methodology which sort of allows the visualization of an electron in orbit, and you see the electron in red. So very, very striking in terms of what you can see. Here are some of the manipulations that can take place. Here are iron atoms on a copper sheet, and you can see the iron atoms being moved around and manipulated into a circle. Very striking. And here's some silicone atoms. And what you see in these images are the silicone atoms being moved back and forth with the probe, so manipulation at the atomic level. Very, very striking. Let's have the sound up. A little more. A little more sound, please. It looks like we may have trouble with the sound as we go through, and I'll try to work with it. But fundamentally, what you're seeing here is a scene from one of the classic films of the 80s, Blade Runner, in which the woman is a artificially created being that is so perfect that she doesn't even realize that she is artificially created. And as you know, over time, that people have been really mesmerized by the concept of being able to create a bionic structure, and it goes back really to the 16th century, as you see here, where in 1504 an iron prosthetic hand with flexible joints was created, and then as you go down through the years, you can see the various attempts of trying to create elements of a mechanical augmentation of body function. And you can see everything here over the years, and you know that the various implantations of artificial hearts and various methodologies for silicone neural interface that we have, the auditory brain implant, and so on. So right now, other than that, we can have novel drug delivery units. We can have bioprosthetics, novel biomaterials, engineered tissues, engineered organs, and robotic units. Now later, we're going to be able to create things on an ever-decreasing scale and recapitulate all functions of the body through process engineering. And using this concept of process engineering, we're going to be able to engineer genetic content, gene expression, protein products, cell structure and function, and organ structure and function. Through this concept of biomimetics, we're going to be able to fundamentally mimic the biology of what our functions are and to create an adaptable and evolving unit, and provide integration of the machinated parts with living tissue through biocomputers, biosensors, and bionics. And we're moving toward that, and we're moving toward that quickly. We have a fullerene molecule, the first nano component, and we have the other components that can be created into molecular units. We have nanotubes, nanomanipulators, nanowires, molecular motors. And here's some nanoparticles that you see here, and with some of their size and the various nanofibers and nanotubes. And here's the fullerene unit, the 60-carbon unit that really was discovered by Smalley and Al, that gave them the Nobel Prize a number of years ago. Now, I showed you bottom-up type of fabrication in nanoscale, but there's also a top-down type whereby you have elements of surfaces and you begin to manipulate surfaces to create mirrors. And here you can see microfabricated cell sorters that's been created with nano units on surfaces. And more, you can see these NEMS objects fabricated with what's called a single crystal silicone using a electron beam methodology. Microfabrication of actuators, which you see here, and micro and heading toward nanoscale at this time. And very interesting, a number of years ago, from some Cornell researchers creating a motor that was based on ATP. So here are some sequences that were taken from an article in Science that show a nanoscale motor that was powered by ATP, and the actual component of the motor moving like a windmill. Now, there are areas of nanoscience that are very pertinent to us and pertinent to biomedicine, and here's a list of them. And you can see what it is, but we can create, structures that we can use. We can have applications for treatment. We can mimic structures that actually occur within the body through nanotech. And we can have the bioelectronic interfaces using nanotech. We can use nanotech to create a more precise detection of disorders when they're taking place. And we can also use them as tools for study for single molecules, and we can create tissues with it. So very, very key for what our future is. Now, in 2004, the National Institutes of Health gave a roadmap for what a nanomedicine initiative should be, and they created a lot of funding opportunity in this. They wanted to obtain a comprehensive set of measurements on molecules and assemblies of molecules, and they wanted to employ these molecules to understand molecular pathways and networks. They wanted to employ this information to drive the design and development of nano machines and technologies to improve health. So lots of money there. So nanomedicine encompasses medical diagnosis, monitoring, or treatment at the atomic and single molecule level. And right now we're seeing remarkable advances in imaging, diagnosis, and treatment using this. There are a number of different elements for imaging that have been very useful. We have what are called quantum dots. We have magnetic nanoparticles. We have cross-linked iron oxides. The quantum dots are something that are very fascinating because what they are is they're elements of crystalline molecules that are created by changing mixing ratios of the chemicals that you have, and they will fluoresce for a long period of time. By changing the mixing ratios, you get various colors that don't quench, and they're created at the nanometer level, and they're very useful in terms of what you can do to use them. And here's a cell that fundamentally has been outlined by a combination of methodology with fluoropores and with these Q dots, and you can see the remarkable detail that we can get using that. And here's some Q dot labeling in living cells, cancer cells, Q dots labeling as markers for tumors, as you can see, and Q dots being used as or iron particles in this case being used for markers of various tumor presence in various tumor types. It's already being used, as you know, from articles in your imaging journals, and we've had a number of articles in neurosurgery that relate to the utilization of these iron particles at the nano level, much more precise in detailing the early presence of glial tumors than the standard type of contrast agents that we use now. We can also use these techniques of nanotech to detect DNA. And I don't have time to go through all of them, but I want you to be aware of them, that there are various methodologies that you see for DNA detection where the sensitivity far exceeds what is possible by what standard methods are. This is a cantilever a type of unit that is used to detect minute quantities of certain elements of DNA. It is so sensitive that this year it is anticipated that using this kind of a method we'll be able to measure the weight of a proton. So it is exceptionally sensitive in terms of what it can do, and here's the methodology that's used with the cantilevers to do it. We also have, we talked about micro arrays yesterday, a little bit of comments about it, but you can see by using nano scale thinking and methodology that you can infinitesimally move the capabilities for the kind of assays that you can do in tissue assays for DNA with what this method is, and here's another methodology for doing it. Now, we can use treatment for improved release of drugs, increased efficiency in relation to it, improved safety and compliance in the use of drugs, reduction of secondary effects, and we can have it for targeted drug release as well. And there's a real advantage of using this nanoscale method because it penetrates tissues better. And there are a number of vehicles that can be used. Look to your left. There's a long line of vehicles, and this is what they look like in really schematic form. These dendrimers can be actually programmed at nanoscale to have multiple functions, and they are very useful, and NIH, NCI are doing a lot of studies associated with them. And of course, polymer slow release or program release constructs are also very important. This is a video that came from our NCI that really has sound associated with it, even though we don't hear it. But it really talks about the benefits of nanoscale thinking from a standpoint of the identification of tumor cells, the use with drugs, and the use of nanoscale thinking from a standpoint of surgery by using nanoscale iron particles and then using either ultraviolet light or ultrasound to affect the iron particles within a tumor mass. So again, with our NCI and NIH, a great deal of work going on in terms of using it. Now, from a standpoint of surgery, there are a number of nanoscale units that can be used, the so-called femtosecond laser systems, nanoneedles, nanotweezers, and optical tweezers that I'll show you. A femtosecond is a 1/4 of a second, and is to a second what a second is to 32,700,000,000 years. When compared with a laser, when combined with a laser pulse, ultra-precise manipulation of material is possible with literally no damage to the tissues around it. And here is this femtosecond laser being used on the cytoskeleton of an endothelial cell with various strengths of nanojoule energy shifts. And you can see how sharp the cuts are. Here this femtosecond laser is being used on a mitochondrion. And here's again a actin filament where you see the cytoskeleton is being ablated using this laser. Nanoneedles, nanomanipulation using nanotweezers with polystyrene clusters. And here is an actin filament being tied in a knot with a nano method. So nanoneurosurgery will be the application of nanotechnology to the spectrum of neurosurgical disorders, and it will employ elements and capabilities of nanotech to diagnose and treat potential or existing central and peripheral nervous system disorders. And you can look at some of the systems that we have now on your left, the femtosecond laser systems, nanoneedles, nanotube, nanotweezers, optical tweezers, etc. Optical tweezers are especially impressive because what it does is use photons of light to move atoms, and I've seen it at Caltech, and it's very striking how the light, and actually you're running a photon by an atom, and in doing that, it's sort of like in the slipstream as that photon is going by the atom, you see the atom move according to this photon, pushing it to where you want to have it go. So very, very striking in terms of what it can do. And so you can just envision what the potential applications of everything that I've been talking about would be from the standpoint of its use of quantum dots for us, multifunctional dendrimers, as I showed you earlier, nanoparticle-based drug delivery systems, gold nanoshells, nanowires, nanotubes, and so on and so forth. So you let your imagination run wild. I think that perhaps in the future it may be possible, this is another a video with some sound that's associated with it, but what it shows is an actual nano unit being injected.
Voyage to cure from within. This is a device called a respirosite. Its mission, to release oxygen molecules into the blood and sop up the carbon dioxide, allowing the body to breathe freely once again. One day, such tiny robots may be the vanguard of an army of miniature medical warriors that seek out disease cells and kill them one by one.
Well, I think there's plenty of room at the bottom for neurosurgery, and certainly I don't think that it's outrageous to think that that in the future that we will be able to manipulate at the nanoscale, at the atomic scale, to have an effect on disorders that really are a Gordian knot for us at this point in time. And we're reinventing neurosurgery, and neurosurgery is really different. As we saw earlier, it's been different generation or decade by decade. It's different almost month to month, and certainly on our service, if somebody comes, they leave for 6 months, they come back. It's almost a totally different service in terms of how we're doing things and what our capabilities are. So things are moving very fast. And I think as Harvey Cushing, if he were here, the things that we're doing now would seem fantastic to him, and in another 100 years, I do believe that if we were present in 100 years, it would seem fantastic what our future progeny are going to be doing within the field. So, in this short time, what I've done, I've really tried to give an idea of the scope and scale of what modern science is, from 10 to the 9th, and getting dust from a tail of a comet to operating at 10 to the minus 9th, and what the opportunities are for us. So extremely striking, and for those of you who are interested, I think you know that we've already had 4 issues of the journal with covers and with important stories on nanotech in them. We'll have 2 more coming out at the first of the year. January and February will both feature updates on what's going on in the field of nanotech and the potential applications of it to what we do in neurosurgery now and in the next 50 to 100 years. So thank you very much for listening to this conference call.
So you have 15 minutes later. So I think in his speech, the young neurosurgeon have many things to do to study about nanotechnology, and we should search in internet. So it's common sense now. Thank you very much, Professor Apuzzo. So next speaker, Professor Nobuhito Saito from Tokyo University. Last year I had a chance to have a chair together in Japan in this Korean friendship conference in stroke. He was graduated in Tokyo University Medical School in 1987 and neurosurgical training there till 1992. During that period, he had stroke research in NIH for 2 years. He became a staff neurosurgeon from 1993 to 2000 in Tokyo University Hospital, and then he moved as an assistant professor. Maybe young neurosurgeons don't know it in Japan system. Assistant professor is very difficult to become in Japan, and in Gamma University, and from 2000, and 2 years later he became a youngest professor at Gamma University, and from 2006 he became a professor of Tokyo University. Tokyo University is one of the leading posts in Japan and as well as in world. So he's the youngest professor in Tokyo University ever in history. Now, Dr. Saito, Professor Saito will talk perspective of neurosurgery in Tokyo. Would you please start?
Thank you, Professor Kim. I really would like to congratulate on this 50th anniversary of this famous Korean Seoul National University. As one of the brother, department in Asian area, I am very happy, and it's my great honor to have a chance to speak at this moment. Today's my talk is about future perspective of neurosurgery at Tokyo, and I would like to talk about some recent our trials for future, and in details MEP monitoring and tractography and the visualization of cranial nerves for MBD. So during the past decades, there have been outstanding technical advances of neurosurgery. I believe that we mostly benefit today from advanced development of computer sciences such as CT or MRI. Predicting future for next decades, I think we will still have major benefits, mainly from development of computer sciences. On the other hand, rapid development of information society in the worldwide scale, the patients are knowledgeable about the medical system or diseases. So their demand is getting higher and higher. This is the number of new legal action in the country, and not only the neurosurgical part, but everything. It's not so high compared to Western countries, but it's surely increasing, and we have to prepare against this. And we Japanese neurosurgeons have another problem here. This is number of neurosurgeons, the year here, and now we have about 8,000 neurosurgeons in the country. This means the younger doctors has less chance to operate, for operation. So what we and this is another issue. We are facing the problem of aging society. The red one is Japan, and this yellow line is Korea. We see the same problem. In 50 years, the percentage of aged 65 or over people are approximately 40%. So we have to. This is Japan, and this part is over 65, and we need to take care of these people. So I'm sure that they have more surgical risks and more need to be treated for medical care. So what we have to do, or what we have to prepare now, is to lower surgical risks, to stay as a surgeon. It's easy to shift to internal medicine part, but we need to try to lower the surgical risks. And for this purpose, we recently developed a monitoring system, MEP especially. And we also use monitoring of blood flow, Doppler fluorescence angiography and endoscopy, and navigation everywhere in the world. And this preoperative simulation will be very important in the near future. For cerebrovascular surgery, I'm a cerebrovascular surgeon. I actively use these planned bypass surgery, and this will prevent ischemic complications. And furthermore, we use motor evoked potential using the transcranial electrical stimulation using the screw electrode. And this MEP monitoring system is very nice. The patient does not move using this system, because we can limit the power of the stimulation to the threshold level. This is the 2003 perspective study, and now I think in many countries we are treating this part, the unruptured aneurysms, by endovascular surgery. But as you know, the larger or bigger aneurysms have higher risk of rupture rate. So we need to lower the surgical risk at this point. For giant paraclinoid aneurysms, I use suction decompression technique. Briefly, if the aneurysm is big, so we need to divide these perforating arteries. So for that purpose, we trap MCA and ICA, and from the neck carotid artery, I withdraw the blood and deflate the aneurysm and clip this aneurysm. And there is an ischemic complication during this procedure. So first, this is I prepare bypass, planned bypass. This is MCA and the short saphenous vein graft here. And this is just in front of the ear, the superficial temporal artery, so very short saphenous vein bypass graft here. And after making this bypass, this is temporal distal ICA, and blood is withdrawn from the neck ICA. And the aneurysm is, this is A1. So we can now dissect the aneurysm from the surrounding structures, and we can deflate the aneurysm and can safely clip them. And I used MEP monitoring during this suction decompression technique. And what we found is after 5 minutes of the total trap, the MEP became flat. And after release, it recovered. And this is probably because of the ischemia of anterior choroidal artery, and not by the hemispheric ischemia, because we checked the hemispheric blood flow was very good by the postoperative angiography. And this is another case. This is thrombosed giant aneurysm, which developed after the coil embolization of unruptured aneurysm. And in this case, also, after 4.5 minutes, MEP became flat. So what we think is that these are all by the ischemia of this anterior choroidal artery. And we accumulated 9 cases so far to treat the giant aneurysms using the suction decompression technique and MEP. And in 8 out of 9 cases, MEP became flat at the 5 minutes after the total trapping, 5, 5, 5, 5, 6, 6, 4.5, and 4.5. So this one is the only one which in which we are able to keep the blood flow to the anterior choroidal artery through the posterior communicating artery. So anyway, what we would like to know next is it reversible or not? What's the meaning of MEP flat? And we made an experiment on miniature pig. And what we found is this is a miniature pig brain. There is the anterior choroidal artery here, and by occluding this anterior choroidal artery, we can make this type of lacunar infarction nicely and reproducibly. And using this model, we tried MEP, and what we found is, yes, it became flat after 5 minutes, and the average time was 6 minutes and 12 seconds. But after release, they all recovered. And how about 10 minutes occlusion? We tried three pigs, but in all cases, MEP recovered. And 15 minutes occlusion, only in one pig it recovered, and 3 no recovery. But after the final point, the hemiparesis does not remain, and we did a histological examination, and in these cases we do not have any histological change more. So what we can say at this moment is that MEP gives us a warning sign at around 5 minutes, but it's still recoverable, and probably up to 15 minutes occlusion might be safe. And I say this 10 minutes occlusion is okay, but a further study is necessary to understand what's going on under this pathological condition. And in another aneurysmal cases, we found these 3 MEP change in middle cerebral artery thrombosed giant aneurysms, and I show some example. This is a giant thrombosed aneurysms, and we need to open the aneurysms and thrombectomy and reconstruction of this MCA. In this case, I first have done the planned bypass, and after opening the Sylvian fissure, I could clip. I could place proximal temporary clip, and after the proximal control, I opened the aneurysm, and this white thrombus is very hard, and it's far from the inside of the blood flow, and coming to the cavity, and at this moment, MEP became almost flat at 37 minutes, so we took a rest here, and it recovered immediately. And then after recovery, we trapped the aneurysms again, and continued the decompression. And probably this is due to the ischemia of perforant artery, lateral lenticular 8 striate artery. And after cleaning up the inside, we reconstructed the MCA by using 2 clips. So this is another case. Now this big thrombosed aneurysm. And in this case, it happened in 2 minutes. In 2 minutes, lateral ventricular striate artery was ischemia caused MEP, made MEP flat. So, so far, I think MEP is very useful for cerebrovascular surgery, and it's, it tells us the warning sign for ischemic complications. And the next issue is tractography and direct fiber stimulation. So this is the tractography, and recently we can know where the pyramidal tract is using these 3D images. And this also optic fibers here and corpus callosum. And we would like to use this tractography on navigation system. So a graduate student developed a system and a machine. And now we can use this type of tractography on this navigation system. But as you know, brain cyst occurs during the surgery after the craniotomy. So we have to check where these pyramidal tracts are during the surgery even. So this is an example before surgery here and pyramidal tract here, and after surgery. So we checked the pyramidal tracts by using this direct stimulation of fibers and something like this, electrical stimulation of fibers. And after removal of the tumor, we always check the threshold level of this stimulation. And in this case, the MEP threshold of fiber stimulation was 3 milliampere. And we accumulated these data. And what we found is that strong correlation between threshold of stimulation and distance. That means we can know how far the pyramidal tract is by checking the threshold level of this stimulation. And for example, this 20 millimeter apart from the distance from the pyramidal tract to the tumor cavity, the stimulation we need is 20 milliampere. But here at 3.3 millimeter, we need only 5 milliampere. So the real direct stimulation of cortical spinal fibers will be 2.8 millimeter. But in anyway, this is in good relation, so we can roughly estimate how far it is from the tumor cavity to the important fibers. And the third issue is cranial nerve and surgical simulation. Currently, I think many doctors are using heavy T2 image to see the shape of nerves or vessels, and TOS SPGR, this is the MRA image to find where the vessels are. And we check these both of these images and know where is the nerves and where arteries. And this by using 3 Tesla MRI machine, this 3D heavy T2 weighted images are improving this very fine nerve structures we can see in 3D. And what we this is the reconstruction of this heavy T2 image, and 3D image here. And what is difficult is we don't know which is nerve, which is artery. Here, this is probably artery, and this is fifth nerve. And we now know that this one is an artery, but it was difficult at this time. So we made a system to fuse heavy T2 image with 3D TOF SPGL image like this, and this is fifth nerve, and this is fifth nerve and two arteries like this, and this is operative figure, and the actual figures are here. So here is this artery here, and another one here. And very recently we have improved our imaging method, and so we can now get this quality of image. And we haven't used this image for clinical use yet, but I'm sure that we can know what to do, and where is nerve is where and arteries are where beforehand, before operation. And we can make a very nice plan for surgical treatment. And also for education, as I said before, we have less chance to do operation. So we need a better education system. So we definitely need this kind of simulation system. And the next part is probably by utilizing the morphing system, we can actually simulate the surgical system. And another one is we also have succeeded in making tractography of cranial nerves, and these will also will be mixed and will be helpful. So this is the final slide. The advancement of various intraoperative monitoring systems will lower surgical risks, and preoperative simulation with advanced imaging techniques will be available. And surgical training in the virtual space may become possible. And we still need to challenge on difficult cases using these advanced technologies. Thank you for your attention.
Professor Saito, thank you very much for an excellent presentation and speech. Because of a time limitation, I would like to ask for a personal question if you have. Thank you very much.
Okay.
예, 감사합니다. 다음에는 제가 자장을 하겠습니다. 전남대학의 김수환입니다. 지금까지는 교실 출신 분들이 나오셔가지고 축하의 말씀을 한 번도 드린 분이 없으신 것 같은데, 제가 외부 대학을 대표로 해서 아마 제일 처음에 나온 것 같습니다. 외부 대학을 대표로 해서 진심으로 우리 서울대학교 의과대학 신경외과학 교실 50주년, 창립 50주년을 진심으로 축하드립니다. 아울러서 앞으로도 더욱더 발전된 모습을 보여가지고 국내에서 뿐만이 아니라 세계적으로 저희 신경외과 분야를 리드해 나갈 수 있는 교실로 발전해 나가기를 진심으로 바람하지 않습니다. 다음에는 영어로 다음 연자를 간단하게 소개 말씀드리겠습니다. I'm Dr. Kim from Jeonnam University. It's my great honor to introduce next invited speaker, Stephan J. Haines, Professor and Department Head of Neurosurgery, University of Minnesota, Minneapolis, USA. Because of limited time, I'd like to recommend you to refer to page 16 of provided program booklet for his full clinical and academic appointments along with education history. This morning, Professor Haines will talk about evidence-based medicine in neurosurgery. Professor Haines, would you start your lecture, please?
Thank you very much, and it's a great honor to be here and to see the tremendous advances and progress that the Department of Neurosurgery here in Seoul has made. Outside of the Dean's office at the University of Minnesota is this plaque. It says, "Friends share all things in common," and it's dated 1954 to 1959. It bears the seals of Seoul National University and the University of Minnesota. It bears evidence to the long-standing relationship between our universities. The city of Seoul has a large river running through it, and National Hospital. The city of Minneapolis has another great river that runs through it, and our hospital is located actually right on the river there. We share much in common in neurosurgery. Our medical schools have been linked and shared knowledge and skills for many decades. And it's a great pleasure to think and learn about that relationship. 3 of the great professors of neurosurgery from this institution have trained at the University of Minnesota. We've already heard of the Harvey Cushing of Korean neurosurgery. Professor Sim spent a couple of years in Minnesota with Dr. Payton and Dr. French, returned, and rarely has such an investment in a single person paid off so handsomely to produce the great department that we see today. Professor Chu and Professor Choi both came to Minneapolis and worked with Dr. French and Dr. Shu, and have strengthened and continued the relationship between our departments, which we hope will continue to grow and be a strong international link in neurosurgery for the future. We've heard a lot about science and its application to neurosurgery this morning already, with some fantastic ideas and tremendous technical skill in the application of scientific advancement to the practice of neurosurgery. What I would like to speak on briefly is the extension of the concept of the application of science to neurosurgery, to the application of scientific principles to the actual practice and the understanding of the practice of neurosurgery. Too often in the past we've seen great ideas developed from great science that when they're actually applied in the clinic don't work. And it is through the application of scientific principles to understanding the practice of neurosurgery that we can achieve even greater application of some of the wonderful ideas that we've heard already. The world of neurosurgery, like the rest of the world, is flat. Neurosurgery has become a global enterprise. Neurosurgeons throughout the world aspire to the same high standards of patient care. Neurosurgical knowledge is shared internationally, and great advances in neurosurgery can come from any country in the world. As this becomes true, standards of neurosurgical practice across the world converge. Inexplicable variation in treatment and outcome is becoming unacceptable. People, quite understandably, expect that their treatment should be determined more by the disease they have than by the neurosurgeon they see. More clinical evidence of higher quality is rapidly becoming available to guide our therapies. All of that's wonderful, but it makes the job of keeping up, staying up to date and being at the cutting edge very difficult. The volume of new clinical information exceeds our ability to absorb it. Maintaining established skills and acquiring new technical skills occupy much of a surgeon's time, and therefore summaries of high-quality evidence are essential if the neurosurgeon is to practice up to the international standard. So how does evidence-based neurosurgery fit into this? How does it help us in this very difficult task? First, a definition. Evidence-based neurosurgery is a paradigm of practice in which the best available evidence is consistently consulted first to establish principles of diagnosis and treatment that are artfully applied in the light of the neurosurgeon's training and experience, informed by the individual patient circumstances and preferences, to regularly produce the best possible outcomes. Note that we're talking about both evidence collected by large numbers of neurosurgeons and summarized, and then the individual artful application of that knowledge to the individual patient's case. Evidence-based medicine provides many useful tools to help us in this task. The tool of critical analysis, the careful, objective interpretation of individual scientific studies, allowing the assessment of the quality of that information, the synthesis of several studies with rigorous scientific technique to combine these critically analyzed studies of high quality to produce generalizable conclusions, principles that we can use in the treatment of patients. And then repositories of information, warehouses of systematic reviews, meta-analyses, and evidence-based guidelines that summarize the evidence of high quality and make it accessible and keep us from individually having to redo the work of critical analysis and synthesis each time we see a new patient. What is critical analysis? Critical analysis is the careful objective interpretation of published work. It starts with the identification of the type of study. Clinical work involves many different types of questions that need to be carefully identified if they're to be appropriately analyzed. Patient assessment, diagnostic validation, natural history of the condition, issues of safety and harm, and the most obvious, which is the assessment of treatment effectiveness. Once the question is identified, we have to assess the quality and implementation of the method chosen to answer the question. Is the method chosen the right way to answer the question at hand? In an amazing number of studies, a question is asked, a method that cannot answer the question is applied, and the answer is useless. And finally, we look at the results. To whom do they apply? Do they fit in the context of knowledge that we have about the condition? Can we use these results to effectively treat our patients? Evidence synthesis relies on scientific rigor, not expert opinion, to arrive at conclusions drawn from many studies. The systematic review that is brought to its most rigorous by the Cochrane collaboration involves the rigorous search of the literature, critical analysis of each article, rigorous statistical pooling of data, independent interpretation of the results. Meta-analysis is a statistically rigorous method for pooling data from a number of similar studies. And then evidence-based guidelines, which are summaries of critically analyzed research, systematic reviews, meta-analyses on a specific topic that are organized in such a way as to allow the production of recommendations for patient care at various levels of certainty. Then there are repositories of summarized evidence that are very important because they can save immense amounts of time and work. The Cochrane Library of Systematic Reviews is well known. In the U.S., we have a National Guidelines Clearinghouse, accessible online, that lists systematic reviews and guidelines in all fields of medicine. The National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence in the UK has a similar collection. The British Medical Journal Clinical Evidence publications serve this function. And then in very specific areas, some international scientific organizations, in this case the American Heart Association, maintains a repository of guidelines related to stroke and cardiac disease. So there are many excellent repositories for this information which are readily accessible and provide excellent guidance. Examples in neurosurgery, probably the original guidelines effort were the guidelines for the management of severe traumatic brain injury, which was an international effort from the beginning, a very laborious, serious, and detailed review of the literature that produced a number of statements that have had a substantial impact on the treatment of severe head injury throughout the world. And this effort has now been expanded to include these other areas that are shown on the slide. A summary of randomized clinical trials of neurosurgical procedures that was produced by our Greek colleagues and published in Neurosurgery, showing both in this effort and in the variety of studies that they identified and reported a true international effort in building a strong, high-quality evidence base for neurosurgical operations. Then I'd like to give one example of how the meta-analysis synthesis technique can help to provide clarity about a question that seems difficult at first and based on simply looking at some of the things that are published. Pulmonary embolism is an important preventable cause of death in neurosurgical patients. And the central nervous system is intolerant of postoperative hemorrhage, which unfortunately is the major complication of anticoagulation used to prevent pulmonary embolism. That's placed us as neurosurgeons in a difficult position. Many small series have been reported in the literature suggesting that early postoperative anticoagulant use to prevent pulmonary embolism is safe. Fortunately, death from postoperative pulmonary embolism is pretty rare. It's less than 1% of patients. Unfortunately, that means that small case series cannot technically demonstrate the safety of early postoperative anticoagulation. If we assume a 1% event rate, which is higher than the known risk, a randomized trial of early postoperative anticoagulation would require almost 10,000 patients to demonstrate a 50% reduction in the death rate. Therefore, it seems like an insurmountable obstacle to get high-quality evidence in this regard. Critical analysis of small case series or individual trials leads to the conclusion that there isn't enough evidence to support a claim of safety. However, there are several trials, and applying the rigorous scientific technique of meta-analysis may cast additional light on the subject. In fact, that was done by Iorio and Agnelli in the year 2000. They found 4 randomized trials, all of small size, with a combined total number of patients that's still well below the number one would think was needed, but of 1,032 patients in 4 trials, they identified venous thromboembolic events using either venography or fibrinogen-labeled scanning in 22.6% of patients. Only 1.2% had clinically significant events, and only 3 events, or 0.4%, were fatal. They looked at hemorrhagic complications, including required transfusion, a drop in hemoglobin, intracerebral or retroperitoneal hemorrhage, or hemorrhage requiring an operation. Found 4.4% had some hemorrhagic complication, 1% major, and 0.4% of the hemorrhagic complications were fatal. When these are analyzed and the confidence intervals around the treatment effects are identified, it appears that early use of heparin is in fact reducing the rate of venous thromboembolic events by about 50%. And the combined data suggests that that's a statistically significant effect. That the all bleeding events rate is approximately doubled, and those appear to be statistically significant. That major bleeding rates seem to be increased, although the number of them is small, and that is not a statistically clear effect. One way of trying to understand all that pooled information is to look at it in this way. The number of patients that you would have to treat with early postoperative anticoagulation to prevent a thromboembolic event is only about 10. To prevent a clinically important event is 185, and to prevent a death is 555 patients treated for each death prevented. If we then look at the number needed to harm the patient by causing a hemorrhagic event, we see that when we're looking at insignificant events, it's 32. And if all we care about are the insignificant events, the ones that can be adequately assessed in a small trial, then clearly you treat only 10 patients to prevent an event, and the risk of causing a hemorrhage is about a third of that. But if we talk about clinically important events, the number needed to treat and the number needed to harm are approximately equal. And if what we're really concerned about is preventing death, by the time we've treated 555 patients to prevent one death, we've caused one death, and we're almost ready to cause a second death as a result of hemorrhage. So although the individual trials, when they're looked at, do not show high risk to early postoperative anticoagulation, when we pool the data in a rigorous fashion, we find out that the preventive measure we take causes as much harm as the harm that we're trying to prevent. So a careful application of evidence-based neurosurgical techniques can clarify a difficult-to-understand problem and provide us real guidance in the management of our patients. So I will summarize and end by saying that evidence-based neurosurgery promotes international standards of patient care. It promotes, indeed requires, high-quality clinical research efforts, and it can add clarity to areas of controversy, and it provides tools to help the practicing neurosurgeon improve patient care. Are there problems with evidence-based neurosurgery? Yes. There's not enough high-quality clinical evidence in neurosurgery. Neurosurgeons are not skilled in the techniques of critical analysis and synthesis. It's hard work, and syntheses and summaries must be continually updated because new high-quality clinical research information becomes available every day. But evidence-based neurosurgery is an international effort that is critical to improving patient care. The effort is to generate high-quality clinical evidence, to replicate those results in many countries so that we can understand the generalizable principles of clinical neurosurgery, and it requires the work of synthesis and updating, which will require neurosurgeons throughout the world to continue that effort. So I will invite my colleagues here at Seoul National University and throughout the world to join in this effort so that we can continuously improve the quality of neurosurgical patient care by applying the same scientific principles to the practice of neurosurgery that we apply to developing neurosurgical innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Haines, for the very informative lecture. This subject was published in details as a topic review article in Neurosurgery, Volume 52, Number 1, January 2003. If you have interest in this field, please refer to the journal and contact Professor Haines personally during the break time. Thank you very much.
이번 세션 연자분들께 감사장을 전달해 드리겠습니다. Now, Chairman Professor Kim will give the speakers a letter of appreciation. Dr. Apuzzo, come to the podium, please. Professor Apuzzo, on behalf of the Department of Neurosurgery, Seoul National University College of Medicine, I take a great pleasure in presenting you this letter of appreciation in acknowledgement of your lectures, Capturing Stardust, given to our faculties and colleagues on September 1st, 2007 at this college. Dong-Gyu Kim, Professor and Chairman, Department of Neurosurgery, Seoul National University Hospital. Professor Saito. Nobuhito Saito, on behalf of the Department of Neurosurgery, Seoul National University College of Medicine, I take a great pleasure in presenting you this letter of appreciation in acknowledgement of your lectures, Future Perspective of Neurosurgery at Tokyo, given to our faculty and colleagues on September 1st, 2007 at this college. Dong-Gyu Kim, Professor and Chairman, Department of Neurosurgery, Seoul National University College of Medicine. Then Professor Haines. Stephan Haines, on behalf of the Department of Neurosurgery, Seoul National University College of Medicine, I take a great pleasure in presenting you this letter of appreciation in acknowledgement of your lectures, evidence-based medicine in neurosurgery, an international search of standards, given to our faculty and colleagues on September 1st, 2007 at this college. Dong-Gyu Kim, Professor and Chairman, Department of Neurosurgery, Seoul National University College of Medicine. 안내 말씀드리겠습니다. 그 점심 식사는 그 명찰 뒤쪽에 보시면 식권이 있는데 여기 11층 그 가든뷰라는 중식당입니다. 중식당에서 식사가 있으시기 때문에 그 식권을 가지고 지금 올라가셔서 식사를 하시고 1시 반에 다시 오후 세션을 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 그리고 지금 그 교실 내 교수님들과 연자분들은 사진 촬영이 연단에서 있겠습니다. Now we are going to take a picture with all our faculties and speakers. So 그래서 각 수행 담당자분들은 연자분들 모시고 앞으로 좀